They thought they had buried you. They planned your funeral while you were still breathing, divided your belongings while you were still standing, and rewrote your story while you were still becoming. But what they didn't calculate was the difference between a grave and a garden. Both require burial, but only one produces resurrection. You were never meant to stay underground. Every seed looks dead before it blooms. Every chosen vessel looks defeated before it dominates. And your enemies made the fatal mistake of judging the middle of your story as if it were the ending. There's something poetic about the moment when reality contradicts their narrative. When the person they wrote off as finished crosses their path, radiating a light they can't explain. That cognitive dissonance, the mental strain of reconciling what they believed with what they're witnessing, creates a specific kind of torment. It's not just surprise, it's the slow, horrifying realization that they misjudged everything. The timeline, the target, and most dangerously, the one who authored your assignment. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance. Spiritualists call it divine irony. But whatever name you give it, the result is the same. Your enemies are experiencing a level of mental and spiritual disruption that no comeback speech could ever deliver. They're not just watching you win. They're reliving every moment they underestimated you, every word they spoke against you, every celebration they held at your expense. And now those moments play on repeat, narrated by the undeniable evidence that they were wrong. See, your resurrection wasn't designed to be quiet. It was orchestrated to echo, not because you need validation, but because heaven refuses to let injustice have the last word. When God vindicates his chosen, it's never subtle. It's a statement, a reminder to everyone watching that the ones who endure the deepest valleys are being prepared for the highest mountains. Your enemies didn't just lose a battle. They lost the privilege of saying they knew you before. Because the version of you that emerged from the fire is someone they never had the capacity to recognize. Welcome to the reckoning, where their assumptions meet your anointing, where their limitations collide with your elevation, and where the story they tried to write gets overwritten by the one heaven already published. This isn't about revenge. It's about revelation. And every point that follows will peel back another layer of the awakening your enemies are being forced to face. Hash number 1. They thought God's silence meant God's absence for months, maybe even years. Your enemies operated with unchecked confidence. They lied without consequence, schemed without resistance, and celebrated without interruption. Every day that passed without visible retribution convinced them they were untouchable. They mistook God's patience for God's permission, his silence for his approval. But anyone who understands divine timing knows that delay is not denial, it's preparation. God's silence was never absence, it was observation. He was watching how far they would go, what they would reveal about themselves when they thought no one was keeping score. Every act of betrayal, every whispered slander, every calculated move was being documented not for your information, but for their education. Heaven doesn't react emotionally. It responds strategically. And the timing of your breakthrough wasn't random. It was surgical. They got comfortable in their deception because nothing stopped them. You didn't fight back the way they expected. You didn't curse them out, expose them publicly, or wage the petty war they were equipped to handle. Instead, you withdrew. You went silent. You focused on healing. And that confused them. They interpreted your peace as defeat, your silence as surrender. But what they called weakness was actually warfare on a level they couldn't perceive. While they were celebrating what they thought was your downfall, heaven was setting the stage for their awakening. Every tear you cried in private became evidence. Every prayer you whispered became a legal document in the spiritual courtroom. God wasn't ignoring what happened to you. He was building a case. And when the verdict finally came, it didn't just address their actions. It exposed their intentions. Now they're learning a lesson that only comes through experience. Divine timing is perfect, even when it's painful to wait for. God's silence wasn't a sign that he didn't care. It was proof that he cared enough to let them reveal exactly who they were before he revealed exactly who you are. They thought they were getting away with it, but they were actually filling the cup of their own consequences. And now that it's overflowing, there's no denying where it came from. The brutal truth is this: they operated in borrowed time. Every moment they spent celebrating your struggle was on loan from a patience they didn't understand. And now the bill has come due. Not because you sought revenge, but because heaven never forgets what happens to its anointed. God's silence was the calm before the vindication, and his absence was only an illusion created by their arrogance. Hash number 2. Your breakdown was actually a breaking open. They watched you fall apart and assumed you were disintegrating. They saw your tears and called it weakness. They witnessed your withdrawal and labeled it failure. But what looked like a breakdown to human eyes was actually a breaking open in the spiritual realm. You weren't falling apart. You were being cracked open so everything that didn't belong could finally drain out. Every painful moment, every sleepless night, every season where you felt like you couldn't hold it together was necessary. Not as punishment, but as preparation. You couldn't carry what was coming in the same container that held your trauma. You couldn't walk into your destiny dragging the weight of people who never valued you. Something had to break. And God, in his wisdom, chose to break the vessel, not the vision. Your enemies saw fragility. Heaven saw readiness. They thought your breaking point was your ending point, but it was actually your turning point. You weren't losing your mind. You were losing your tolerance for anything that violated your peace. You weren't losing your strength. You were losing the illusion that strength means never needing to fall apart. The breakdown stripped you of pretense, people-pleasing, and the exhausting performance of being strong for people who were actively weakening you. What they didn't understand is that transformation is violent. Butterflies don't emerge from cocoons with ease. They struggle, they fight, they break through. And that struggle is what makes them strong enough to fly. Your breaking wasn't destruction, it was reconstruction. Heaven was dismantling the version of you that could be manipulated, controlled, and underestimated. In its place, something unshakable was being formed. Now, standing on the other side, you're not the same person they once knew, and that terrifies them, because the version of you that broke down was predictable. The version that broke open is powerful. They can't manipulate peace that's been tested by fire. They can't control someone who's already survived their worst-case scenario. They can't gaslight someone who's faced themselves in the dark and emerged with clarity. Your breakdown didn't end you. It refined you. It turned you into someone who doesn't need their approval, doesn't fear their rejection, and doesn't flinch at their attempts to destabilize you. That breaking season wasn't a setback. It was a setup. And now they're witnessing firsthand what happens when God restores what he breaks open. The cracks they mocked have become the places where your light shines brightest. Hash number 3. They confused your kindness for ignorance they thought you didn't notice. They convinced themselves that your grace meant you were blind, that your forgiveness meant you were foolish, that your patience meant you were oblivious. But chosen ones aren't naive. They're discerning. You saw everything. You noticed every lie, every manipulation, every moment they smiled in your face while sharpening knives behind your back. You just chose not to react the way they expected. See, there's a difference between being unaware and being unbothered by what you're aware of. You operated from a place of spiritual maturity that they mistook for ignorance. You knew what they were doing, but you also knew that exposing them wasn't your assignment. Your job wasn't to prove they were wrong. It was to protect your energy while heaven prepared your exit. So you stayed kind, not because you didn't know better, but because you did. They took your kindness as permission to go further. Every time you extended grace, they saw it as proof they could get away with more. They didn't understand that your silence wasn't approval. It was strategy. You were giving them enough rope to reveal their true nature, not just to you, but to everyone watching. You didn't need to expose them. You just needed to step back and let their character do it for you. Now the truth is undeniable. The same people who thought they were fooling you are realizing they were only fooling themselves. Your kindness wasn't ignorance. It was wisdom. You chose peace over proving points. You chose elevation over explanation. And that choice saved you from wasting energy on people who were never going to change until life forced them to. What's painful for them now is the realization that you always knew. You saw through the act, understood the game, and still chose not to play. That level of self-control haunts people who have none. They replay moments in their mind, wondering what you were thinking when you smiled through their betrayal, when you blessed them despite their curses, when you walked away without a word. The answer is simple. You were thinking about your future, not their foolishness. They confused your kindness for weakness, your awareness for ignorance, and your restraint for inability to fight back. But the truth is, you were always 3 steps ahead. You just moved in silence while they moved in arrogance. And now that the dust has settled, it's painfully clear who was really in control all along. Spoiler, it was never them. Hash number 4, the isolation was an incubation. When everyone left, when the invitation stopped, when the phone went quiet and the circle shrank to nearly nothing, it felt like exile. You questioned what you did wrong. You wondered if something about you was broken, unlovable, or too much. But isolation in the hands of God is never punishment. It's incubation. He wasn't removing people to hurt you. He was clearing space to rebuild you. You needed to be alone because you couldn't hear your own voice in the noise. You couldn't heal while managing everyone else's opinions of your process. You couldn't transform while dragging an audience that was more invested in your struggle than your success. So heaven did what you couldn't bring yourself to do. It removed the crowd. And in that silence, something sacred began to happen. The isolation forced you to confront parts of yourself you'd been avoiding. It stripped away distractions and left you face to face with your pain, your patterns, and your purpose. There was nowhere to hide, no one to perform for, no buffer between you and the truth of who you were becoming. It was uncomfortable. It was lonely. But it was necessary, because transformation doesn't happen on a stage. It happens in the secret place. Your enemies saw your solitude and called it rejection. They assumed you were being punished, abandoned, left behind. But they didn't understand the difference between isolation and incubation. One is empty, the other is full. You weren't alone. You were being filled with clarity, with strength, with a version of yourself that couldn't have been born in the chaos they created. Incubation requires separation. A seed can't grow if it's constantly being dug up to check its progress. A baby can't develop if the womb is constantly being disturbed. And you couldn't become who you were meant to be if you remained accessible to people who were draining you. Heaven knew that. So it built a wall around you, not to trap you, but to protect the process. Now, emerging from that season, you're not the same. The isolation didn't break you. It built you. The silence didn't weaken you. It sharpened you. And the loneliness that once felt unbearable is now the foundation of an unshakable peace. You learn to be whole by yourself, to hear God without interference, to stand firm without validation. That's not isolation. That's evolution. Your enemies thought they were watching you lose, but they were actually witnessing your incubation. And now that you've hatched, the wingspan of who you've become is something they never could have predicted. Hash number 5. They didn't break you, they broke their access to your future. They thought destroying you would make them feel powerful. But all they really destroyed was their invitation to witness your greatness. Every act of betrayal, every attempt to sabotage you, every moment they chose cruelty over character, they were severing their own connection to the favor that followed you. They didn't break you. They broke their access to the future you were always going to have. See, when you're anointed, your presence carries weight. Being in your circle isn't just friendship. It's proximity to purpose. It's a front row seat to what God does when He honors faithfulness. Your enemies had that access. They could have grown with you, celebrated with you, been part of the testimony. but they chose sabotage. And in doing so, they disqualified themselves from the very success they were jealous of. Now you're walking in rooms they'll never enter, meeting people they'll never access, operating on levels they'll never understand. And the painful part for them is knowing they could have been there, not as leeches or spectators, but as genuine witnesses to what loyalty looks like when it's rewarded. But they gambled your value and lost. There's a unique kind of regret that comes from realizing you destroyed your own opportunity. They can't blame you. You didn't block them. You didn't cut them off out of spite. Heaven did it. Because once you violate the trust of a chosen vessel, you don't just lose the relationship. You lose the access that relationship provided. It's a spiritual law, and it's irreversible. They look at your life now and feel the sting of what could have been. Not because they love you, but because they loved what being near you provided. And now that they've been removed, they're experiencing life without the covering, the favor, the grace that followed you. Things that used to work don't work anymore. Doors that used to open stay closed. The ease they once felt has been replaced with resistance, and deep down they know why. Breaking you was never the victory they thought it would be. It was the loss they'll spend years trying to recover from. You didn't just survive, you thrived. And they didn't just attack you, they attacked their own future. That's the price of touching what God is protecting. You don't get to walk away unscathed. Hash number 6. Your silence became their loudest conviction. They wanted a reaction. They needed you to yell, to defend yourself, to crumble publicly so they could feel justified in their cruelty. But you gave them something far more powerful than words. You gave them silence, and that silence became the loudest statement you could have made. It left them with nothing to argue against, nothing to twist, and nowhere to hide from the truth. When you stopped explaining, they lost the narrative. When you stopped defending, they lost their ammunition. And when you stopped caring about being understood by people committed to misunderstanding you, you took away the only power they had. Your silence wasn't avoidance. It was authority. It said, I don't owe you access to my peace, my process, or my perspective. And that refusal to engage disrupted everything they built. People who thrive on chaos need your participation. They need you to argue so they can play victim. They need you to react so they can say you're unstable. They need your emotion so they can feed off the energy you provide. But when you went silent, you starved their strategy. The games they played required 2 players, and you simply stopped playing. What they didn't realize is that silence in the hands of the mature is a weapon. It forces people to sit with their own actions without the distraction of your response. It removes the buffer they used to avoid accountability. And when there's nothing left to argue with, they're forced to face what they did in its rawest form. That's when conviction sets in. Now they're haunted by your silence. It's not passive, it's present. It lingers in their mind, replaying moments they wish they could take back. They wonder what you're thinking, what you know, what you've moved on to. And that mystery torments them more than any argument ever could. Because silence doesn't defend, it simply exists. And its existence is proof that you've moved beyond their reach. Your silence didn't mean you had nothing to say. It meant they'd lost the right to hear it. And that realization, that loss of access to your inner world, is a consequence they'll carry long after the situation has ended. They wanted a reaction. You gave them reflection. And now they can't escape it. Hash number 7. They celebrated too early and heaven took notes. They threw a party when you fell, toasted to your struggle, posted subliminal messages celebrating what they thought was your demise. They got so comfortable in their mockery that they forgot one critical detail. Heaven was watching. And every premature celebration became evidence in a case they didn't know was being built. There's something deeply offensive to God about celebrating the suffering of His anointed. Not because He's petty, but because it reveals a heart condition that can't go unchecked. When they laughed at your pain, they weren't just mocking you. They were mocking the process God was using to prepare you. And that kind of arrogance doesn't go unaddressed. They thought your downfall was permanent. They assumed the valley you were in was your final destination. So they celebrated as if the story was over, as if your chapter had ended, as if they'd finally won. But they forgot that God specializes in resurrection, that his greatest miracles happen after the funeral, that the people he's preparing for prominence often look defeated right before they're promoted. Their celebration was premature, and heaven took notes. Every laugh, every mocking post, every conversation where they gloated over your struggle was recorded, not for your revenge but for their correction. Because when God elevates you out of that valley, he doesn't do it quietly. He does it publicly. And everyone who celebrated your fall gets a front row seat to your rise. Now the same platforms they used to mock you have become stages for your testimony. The same people they gossiped with are now witnessing your comeback. And the narrative they tried to write is being overwritten in real time. They celebrated too soon, and now they're choking on the confetti. What makes this even more painful for them is that they can't deny it. Your restoration isn't a rumor. It's visible, undeniable, impossible to discredit. And every time they see evidence of your progress, it reminds them of how wrong they were. Not just about you, but about God's ability to finish what he started. Their early celebration wasn't just embarrassing, it was prophetic, because it revealed exactly who they were when they thought you couldn't recover. And now that you have, heaven is making sure they remember every word they spoke, every assumption they made, and every moment they underestimated the God who never left your side. Hash number 8. You were the standard they couldn't maintain. They resented you, but not for the reasons they claimed. It wasn't your confidence that bothered them. It was your consistency. It wasn't your success that triggered them. It was your integrity. You represented a standard they couldn't maintain, and instead of rising to meet it, they tried to destroy it. Because if they could tear you down, they wouldn't have to face how far they'd fallen. You were a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. Every time they were around you, they were confronted with the gap between who they pretended to be and who they actually were. Your presence made their performance exhausting because you weren't performing. You were just being. And that authenticity was a constant reminder of their fakeness. They couldn't compete with your peace because theirs was pretend. They couldn't match your growth because they were still hiding. They couldn't celebrate your wins because it highlighted their stagnation. So instead of doing the inner work, they chose the outer war. They attacked what they couldn't achieve, criticized what they couldn't sustain, and mocked what they secretly wanted to become. But here's the thing about standards. They don't lower to accommodate mediocrity. You can't drag down someone who's anchored in purpose. You can't dilute someone who's committed to truth. And you can't break someone who's built on a foundation you don't understand. They tried and they failed. Because the standard you carried wasn't self-made. It was God-given. Now they're exhausted. Trying to maintain the image they built is draining them. The fakeness they once wore with ease now feels heavy. The performance they used to pull off effortlessly now requires constant effort. And every time they slip, every time the mask cracks, they're reminded of what they could have been if they'd chosen growth over grudges. You weren't their competition. You were their invitation to evolve. But they saw evolution as a threat, not a gift. And now they're stuck in a version of themselves that they've outgrown but don't know how to shed. Meanwhile, you've moved on, still holding the standard, still walking in integrity, still being the mirror they refused to look into. The standard didn't change. They just proved they were never committed to it in the first place. Hash number 9. Their gossip became their own script. Every lie they told about you, every rumor they spread, every exaggerated story they shared to make you look bad, it all came back. But not as karma in the way most people think. It came back as their lived experience. The script they wrote for you became the script they're now living. Word for word, scene for scene, they called you unstable. Now their life is in chaos. They called you isolated. Now no one trusts them. They called you broken. Now they're the ones trying to piece their life back together. It's almost poetic. The narrative they crafted to destroy your reputation became the narrative that defines their reality. This is the danger of projection. When you speak against someone anointed, you're not just gossiping. You're prophesying over your own life. The energy you release doesn't disappear. It circles back, and when it does, it carries the weight of intention behind it. They intended harm. So harm is what they're now harvesting. What makes this especially brutal is that they can't escape it. Everywhere they turn, they're confronted with the consequences of their words. The same judgment they placed on you is now being placed on them. The same isolation they wished for you has become their reality. The same brokenness they accused you of is now what they're known for. They didn't just lose credibility. They inherited the very curse they tried to assign to you. And there's no PR strategy, no apology tour, no rebranding that can undo what they set in motion. Because this isn't about public perception. It's about spiritual law. What you sow, you reap. And they sowed destruction. Now they're living in the harvest of their own words. The gossip they weaponized became the testimony they can't escape. And every time they try to move forward, they're haunted by the stories they told, the lies they spread, and the reputation they destroyed thinking it was yours. But it was always theirs. Hash number 10. You didn't need revenge, you needed obedience. They expected you to fight fire with fire. They were waiting for you to stoop to their level, to expose them the way they tried to expose you, to hurt them the way they hurt you. But you didn't. Not because you were weak, but because you were obedient. And that obedience unlocked a level of vindication that revenge could never accomplish. Revenge is human. Vindication is divine. Revenge requires your energy. Vindication requires your trust. Revenge gives temporary satisfaction. Vindication gives permanent testimony. You could have clapped back, posted receipts, destroyed their reputation with the truth you were holding. But something in your spirit said, wait, this isn't yours to handle. That restraint wasn't easy. Every part of your flesh wanted justice, wanted them to hurt the way you hurt, wanted the world to see what they did. But obedience demanded something different. It demanded silence when you wanted to scream. It demanded patience when you wanted payback. It demanded trust when you wanted control. And because you obeyed, heaven intervened. Not with your strategy, but with his. And his strategy didn't just clear your name. It elevated your position. It didn't just expose them. It positioned you beyond their reach. You didn't get revenge. You got restored. And restoration is always better than retaliation. Now they see the evidence of what happens when God fights for someone. It's not messy. It's masterful. It doesn't require social media posts or public confrontations. It just requires undeniable results. Your life became the proof. Your peace became the evidence. Your progress became the testimony. And none of it required you to lift a finger against them. Obedience is the ultimate flex, because it says, I don't need to defend myself. The one who assigned me will vindicate me. And when that vindication comes, it's so complete, so thorough, so divine, that even your enemies can't deny the hand of God on your life. You didn't need revenge. You needed obedience. And because you chose the latter, you got something revenge could never give you: freedom, elevation, and a testimony that will outlive the lies they told. Hash number 11. They realized you were never the enemy, you were the assignment. All along they treated you like a threat, like someone to compete with, tear down, and eliminate. But the whole time you were an assignment, sent into their life not to harm them but to help them see themselves. You were the test they failed, the mirror they broke, the opportunity they missed. God places people in our path for a reason. Sometimes it's to bless us, sometimes it's to test us, and sometimes it's to reveal what we're made of when faced with something pure. You were that for them. You were the purity that exposed their poison, the light that revealed their darkness, the truth that made their lies obvious. But instead of receiving the assignment, they resented it. Instead of allowing your presence to refine them, they tried to destroy you for reflecting what they weren't ready to face. They mistook conviction for competition. They mistook their discomfort around you for hatred toward you. But it was never about you. It was about them being forced to confront the gap between who they were and who they were pretending to be. Now, in hindsight, they see it. They realize that you were never their enemy. You were their opportunity, an opportunity to grow, to change, to evolve. But they chose ego over evolution. And now they live with the consequences of failing an assignment they didn't even know they were taking. The saddest part is that you would have celebrated their growth. If they'd chosen honesty over hatred, you would have been their biggest supporter. But they couldn't see that. They were too busy seeing you as a threat to realize you were a gift. A divine assignment wrapped in human form. You weren't sent to hurt them. You were sent to help them see the truth. But truth is only helpful to those willing to receive it. They rejected it. And in doing so, they rejected the very thing that could have set them free. Number 12. Your healing became their disruption while they were celebrating what they thought was your destruction. You were quietly doing the one thing they never expected. You were healing. You went to therapy. You faced your trauma. You forgave yourself for tolerating what you should have walked away from. You rebuilt your sense of self. And in doing so, you became someone they could no longer touch. Healing doesn't just restore you. It disrupts everyone who benefited from your brokenness. The people who thrived off your low self-esteem, your people-pleasing, your need to be accepted, they all lose power when you heal. Because a healed version of you doesn't respond to the same manipulation, doesn't tolerate the same disrespect, doesn't shrink to make others comfortable. Your healing shifted the entire dynamic. The tactics that used to work on you now fall flat. The guilt trips don't land. The gaslighting doesn't confuse you. The fake apologies don't manipulate you into another round of the same cycle. You've upgraded. And they're still running the same outdated software. This disruption is uncomfortable for them because it forces them to realize that their power was never real. It was just your brokenness giving them access. Now that you've healed, that access is gone. And they're left scrambling, trying to figure out how to regain control over someone who's no longer controllable. But here's the beautiful part. Your healing wasn't about them. It was about you. You didn't heal to prove a point. You healed to reclaim your peace. To take back the parts of yourself you'd lost in toxic relationships. To become whole again, not for an audience, but for yourself. And yet, your healing became the loudest statement you could have made. It said, "You didn't break me. You revealed what needed to be healed. And now that it's healed, you no longer have a place in my life." That's not cruelty. That's clarity. And clarity is something they can't argue with. Your healing became their disruption. And now they're forced to find new victims because the old one evolved beyond their reach. Number 13. They thought you were finished, but you were just getting started. Every setback they celebrated, every loss they cheered for, every moment they assumed was your ending, it was all just the introduction. The chapter they thought closed was actually the prologue. You weren't finishing. You were just getting started. See, chosen ones don't peak early. They don't hit their stride in the first act. They endure, they learn, they rebuild. And then, when everyone assumes the story is over, they step into the fullness of what they were always meant to be. Your enemies made the mistake of judging your beginning as if it were your ending. They saw you struggling and assumed that was your limit. They saw you fall and assumed you wouldn't rise. They saw the doors close and assumed there were no more doors to open. But they didn't know the script. They didn't know that God often hides his greatest promotions behind the most painful processes. Now you're walking in a dimension of purpose they never saw coming. The same person they said was finished is now flourishing. The same life they declared over is now overflowing. And the same story they tried to end is now being told as a testimony of resilience, faith, and divine vindication. What's most jarring for them is that you're not just surviving, you're thriving. You're not just recovering, you're excelling. You're not just getting by. You're stepping into levels of influence, peace, and success that they can't deny and can't access. They thought you were finished, but finishing implies an ending, and your story was never designed to end in that valley. It was designed to climb out of it, stronger, wiser, and more anointed than before. You weren't finished. You were being prepared. And now that the preparation is complete, the manifestation is undeniable. You're just getting started. And that truth is a constant, uncomfortable reminder to them that they celebrated too soon, underestimated too quickly, and spoke too loudly about something they knew nothing about. Hash number 14. The greatest revenge was becoming unreachable. They can see you, but they can't touch you. They can talk about you, but they can't affect you. They can remember who you used to be, but they can't access who you've become. You didn't block them out of pettiness. You ascended beyond their frequency. And now, no matter how hard they try, they can't reach you. Being unreachable isn't about physical distance. It's about spiritual elevation. It's about vibrating on a level where their words don't penetrate, their opinions don't matter, and their presence doesn't disturb your peace. You've moved so far beyond the version of yourself they knew that even if they tried to reconnect, there'd be nothing to connect to. This is the ultimate form of closure, not an argument, not a confrontation, not even a conversation. Just growth so significant that the past can't keep up. They're still speaking the language of who you were, but you're fluent in who you've become, and there's no translation. What haunts them is that they can witness your life but can't participate in it. They see your peace and remember when they used to disturb it. They see your success and remember when they tried to sabotage it. They see your joy and remember when they tried to steal it. And all of it exists now in a space they no longer have access to. You didn't need to curse them. You didn't need to expose them. You didn't need to get even. You just needed to grow. And that growth created a distance that no apology, no explanation, no attempt at reconciliation can cross. Because some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt, some chapters aren't meant to be reopened, and some people are only meant to be part of your testimony, not your future. Being unreachable is not about arrogance. It's about alignment. You're no longer available for spaces, energy, or people that don't serve the version of yourself you fought to become. And that boundary, that sacred, non-negotiable distance, is the most powerful statement you could ever make. They wanted to break you. Instead, they made you unreachable, and now they're left watching from a distance, unable to touch, influence, or disturb the peace you've rebuilt. Hash number 15. Heaven didn't just restore you, it relocated you. Restoration is beautiful, but relocation is strategic. God didn't just give you back what you lost, He moved you entirely. New level, new circle, new opportunities, new access. You're not in the same place you were before the battle. You're in a completely different realm, and your enemies are just now realizing they can't follow you there. They thought if you recovered, you'd come back to the same environment, the same spaces, the same level. But God had a different plan. He used the attack as a catapult. Every stone they threw became fuel for your launch. And now you're operating in rooms they don't have clearance for, connections they don't have access to, and a level of anointing they can't comprehend. This is what frustrates them the most. They can't even compete anymore because you're not on the same playing field. You've been relocated, repositioned, reassigned. What they took from you was replaced with something greater. Who they removed from your life made space for people aligned with your destiny. Where they pushed you out of became the exit you needed but were too loyal to take yourself. Heaven didn't just heal you, it upgraded you. And the upgrade came with a new address, new atmosphere, and new assignment. You're not who you were, and you're not where you were. And that dual shift makes it impossible for the past to reclaim you. Now when they look for you, they can't find you. Not because you're hiding, but because you've been moved. Spiritually, mentally, positionally. You exist in a dimension they can't reach because they're not qualified to operate there. The same mess that used to drain you doesn't even register anymore. The same people who used to trigger you are now irrelevant. The same environments that used to confine you are now beneath you. Relocation is confirmation. It's God's way of saying, you've outgrown that season. Now step into this one. And when you do, there's no going back. Not because you're prideful, but because you're purposed. You can't return to a place you've spiritually graduated from. They didn't just lose you. They lost access to the atmosphere you're now walking in. Heaven didn't just restore you. It relocated you beyond their reach, beyond their understanding, and beyond their ability to ever harm you again. Closing. The awakening is irreversible. If you've read this far, you're not here by accident. Every word that resonated, every point that hit a nerve, every moment you felt seen, that's confirmation. You are the chosen one this message was written for. You've been through the fire, walked through the valley, endured the betrayal, and survived the isolation. And now you're standing on the other side watching everything shift. Your enemies aren't just waking up. They're being confronted. Every assumption they made is being corrected. Every lie they told is being exposed. Every plan they made against you is backfiring in real time. And the most beautiful part, you didn't have to do anything but stay obedient, stay focused, and stay the course. This awakening they're experiencing isn't gentle. It's not a slow realization. It's a full-force confrontation with the truth they tried to bury, and there's no going back to ignorance. They know now, they see now, and they'll carry that knowing for the rest of their lives. But here's what you need to understand. Their awakening is not your assignment. Your assignment is to keep walking, keep growing, keep building, and keep becoming. Don't pause your progress to watch them process their regret. Don't delay your destiny to manage their discomfort. You've already given them enough of your time, energy, and emotion. This season is about you. So as you move forward, remember this. You were planted, not buried. You were tested, not destroyed. You were relocated, not rejected. And everything you went through was preparation for everything you're walking into. The best response to those who doubted you is not a speech. It's a life they can't deny, a peace they can't disturb, a joy they can't steal, and a purpose they can't touch. If this message stirred something in your spirit, don't let it end here. Subscribe to this channel for more truth that awakens, challenges, and elevates. Hit that like button to affirm that you're walking in your season of vindication. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's still in the fire and needs a reminder that they're not burning up, they're being refined. And drop a comment below. Let us know which point hit you the hardest. Your testimony matters, your voice matters, and your story is still being written. You didn't just survive the battle, you won the war. Now walk like it, live like it, and let your life be the loudest testimony they'll ever witness. Stay blessed, stay elevated, and welcome to the season where your enemies finally understand they didn't fight you. They fought the God in you, and they lost.